Chapter 8: Finding the Bones. The dinosaurs disappeared from the Earth 65 million years ago, but their bones were left behind. Over time, some of the bones became buried in layers and layers of dirt and mud. Then the layers hardened into rock. The bones became fossils. Millions upon millions of years passed. The first modern humans appeared on Earth only about 200,000 years ago, and only about 10,000 years ago did the first civilizations arise. During all that time, nobody had any idea that the prehistoric world had ever existed. If ancient people found dinosaur bones, they had no idea what they had discovered. Then, in the 17th century, a dinosaur bone was discovered. It was a huge thigh bone found in Cornwall, England. The men who found it took it to a professor named Robert Plot. Plot thought about that bone for a long time. What could it be? He knew it was too big to have come from a horse. Could it be from an elephant that someone brought to England hundreds of years ago? Nope, it was even bigger than an elephant bone. There was only one answer, he decided. It must be from a giant human. That was easier for people to believe than to imagine an animal like a dinosaur. 100 years later, more gigantic bones were discovered in England. By 1842, Gideon Mantell had found and named Iguanodon. William Buckland had named Megalosaurus. Suddenly, people were very interested in finding more gigantic fossils and unfamiliar bones. But what were these giant creatures? Were they reptiles? Mantell and Buckland looked at the bones and thought they must be giant lizards. After all, Iguanodon had the same kind of teeth as an iguana, only bigger. But slowly, scientists began to think a different way, and they began to understand something amazing. Maybe these weren't merely larger versions of species that still existed. Maybe there were whole species of animals that had lived long ago but were now gone. Maybe they were animals that had become extinct. In 1842, a biologist named Richard Owen came up with a name for that group of extinct animals. He called them Dinosauria, which means terrible lizard. Owen was hired to create a display showing the history of the Earth. He worked with another man named Benjamin Waterhouse Hawkins. Together, they created huge hollow sculptures of dinosaurs, or of how Owen thought dinosaurs might have looked. The giant life-size models were put on display in the gardens around London's Crystal Palace. It was a huge glass exhibition hall. On New Year's Eve in 1853, Owen invited a couple of scientists and other important guests to a dinner party. The dinner was held inside the giant Iguanodon sculpture. Once the huge dinosaur sculptures were on display in London, people went crazy for dinosaurs. The craze was called Dinomania. Mary Anning, girl dinosaur hunter. Men weren't the only fossil hunters. A young girl named Mary Anning and her brother Joseph had been trained to hunt for fossils by their father. Mary's family was poor, so they sold the shells and bones to tourists and scientists to earn money. When Mary was 11 years old, her father died. Around that time, she and her brother found an entire ichthyosaur skeleton. She continued to collect dinosaur bones her whole life. Scientists would come to her and buy whatever she found. She was the first person to find a fossil of ancient poop. She also found the first complete plesiosaur skeleton discovered in England. She found a pterosaur as well. As an adult, Mary had a deep understanding of the skeletons she uncovered. She knew she was finding unusual species that hadn't been seen before, but Mary was a woman from a poor background, and not educated. Women were not allowed to join the Geological Society of London at that time, so she never got all the credit that she deserved for her discoveries.